There it is. We are back. It's another beautiful week and funky start to yesterday. Everybody was shut down, including us, but we're taking that as an excuse. Whatever, we're jumping in. Here we go. We're going to have some fun today talking about mononormative messaging everywhere. Can't get away from it. Let's do this.
Practicing Polyamory, real-life perspectives from the imperfect people of polyamory. The mission of the Practicing Polyamory podcast is to provide a platform for all of the real-life, flawed humans that practice polyamory so that we might all learn from one another and grow as a community. Enjoy the show.
All right, everybody. Welcome to this beautiful Tuesday. Sunny after a beautiful rainstorm here in San Diego. That rarely happens, but whatever. Who cares about the weather? If you're joining us for the first time today, welcome and thank you so much for tuning in. And if you've been here for a while, then you already know that we are live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. 3 opportunities every single week for you to ask questions. So if you've got any questions about your relationships, or if there's a topic you'd like to hear discussed on the show, slide into my DMs, let me know, or leave a comment while we're recording live. Follow the show on all social media platforms at Practicing Polya. Let us know what it is that you want us to talk about. And as always, I want to remind you, if you're listening to this podcast, you are a welcome guest to be on this show. None of us are perfect, and we're here to share our imperfect stories, because the more stories we share, the more others will see us in themselves, and the more representation we have, the more we can strengthen our community. So go to practicingpolyamory.com, sign up to share your imperfect story too. All right, that's my spiel, ladies and gentlemen. On to the best part of the show. Let's introduce our awesome guest. Navigating any relationship at all can be hard, and the challenges of maintaining multiple ones are made even harder when our context includes living in a hetero-mono-normative majority culture, which we do. Hollywood and the media fill our world with all kinds of role models for monogamy, but healthy polyam and non-monogamous representation is woefully rare and hard to find. Today's guest gets the lack of representation and understands the difficulty our communities face, and she's built her practice to cater to the needs of sexual minority populations and non-traditional relationships, including LGBTQIA+, polyamorous, and kinky folks. Our guest knows that sometimes there's just too much going on in life and in our heads to be able to slow down long enough to reflect and determine the most effective way to proceed. Sometimes you need a solid sounding board, someone to help you take a step back and gain perspective. And that's exactly what our guest loves and is here to do. Joining us today from Life Tree Counseling out of Prince William County, Virginia, welcome to the show, Alonna Donovan Makinson.
Nice.
Sometimes, I gotta get my energy up too and get this thing rocking and rolling. Alonna, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Thanks
Welcome
for
to the show.
having me. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Tell me a little bit about yourself. I mean, you built your practice to cater to the LGBTQIA, polyamorous, kinky, etc. community. What inspired that?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of start with where I started in counseling. So I actually I got my independent licensure. I earned it in 2016. And at the time, I was working with queer and polyamorous clients, and I was getting more and more polyam clients. And there was a lot of word of mouth, like, people referring people to me. And I think really there was kind of 2 reasons for that. One was working with polyamory is just a really good fit. Like, I can really relate to my clients based on life experience, values, and personality. And the other is, like, at the time, and this was just in 2016, there really wasn't anybody else that I knew of in my community who was serving the polyamorous community. So for me, it was a really important values alignment and match for me to be able to provide those services. And so, in 2019, I started my own practice because I had been in group practice previously. And so I started my own private practice in 2019 and have been really honing in on specializing polyamory. And I provide telehealth services So it's really cool. Now I get to be licensed in 3 states, Ohio, Virginia, and Kentucky. And I get to work with people kind of like all over in those different areas. So it's really fun. I love it.
That is super cool. Yeah. I don't know if that was just because of the pandemic or if that was your plan all along, but the pandemic definitely made it possible for people to access care, especially poly-friendly care, almost no matter where they are.
Absolutely. Actually, it was just weird how kind of like all the telehealth stuff happened and switched over. Like I was planning to switch over to telehealth anyway. And then the pandemic slammed down and it was like one weekend it was like, well, we're doing this. So
Ready or not, here we come.
yep, exactly. So it all happened and it all worked out. I'm really enjoying telehealth. So
I love it. I love it. I'm enjoying telecommuting, teleworking from home.
yeah.
It's all pretty great.
He ain't lying.
So, all right. So this mono-normative messaging, I mean, obviously, I mean, I want to say it's pervasive, but like, that's not exactly the word that I want to use. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. That's probably a better word.
Yeah.
And
That is a good word.
I feel like it's, I guess, because it's never really been challenged. I'm thinking back to, the oldest movies I can think of, the Casablancas, right? Where it's all
Yeah.
about, trying to win the woman over and this, that, and the other. And like, the romance is always between, one man, one woman, right? Like that's just what our media has shown us over and over and over and over again. And so polyamory, non-monogamy, all this stuff feels to me very new, at
Mhm.
least as far as representation in the media, knowledge about, this kind of life, whatever. It's all, in my opinion, relatively new and hasn't been shown very much in the media. How is that reflected in your practice, in the people that you talk to?
Yeah, so I think you bring up a really good point, and ubiquitous is a good word for it because we do get messages from everywhere. We're especially now with like in the media technology age we live in, we're just, constantly bombarded with messages and from all different sources. And so, yeah, it is really interesting when you start to kind of like think about, you know, what are messages around monogamy and non-monogamy, and you start tuning in and noticing those. It really
Mhm.
does kind of stand out. Like, you do start to kind of uncover like, oh, there are a lot of like messages around this that we're getting. And the interesting thing about messages is like sometimes there are messages that are like very direct, but sometimes it can be things that are more direct and more subtle. And we also get messages from things that are unsaid, like what you were mentioning with, a lot of the movies being very monogamy focused. Well, the lack of representation says something about, non-monogamy. So it impacts, I mean, not just my clients, but I mean, it impacts all of us as a society at
Mhm.
large. So
Let's talk a little bit about how it impacts all of us as a society at large. I think one of the um, big struggles or big challenges, I guess, that people may often have in polyamory and in discovering that they are polyamorous is fear of telling anybody about it, fear of mom and dad finding out,
mhm.
fear of people at work finding out, fear of, all of these people finding out. And it's because of what society has told us over and over and over again of what is quote unquote normal and what isn't.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the biggest detrimental consequences to the monogamy normative messaging is this isolation and lack of social support. Because if you're getting messages that, if you identify as polyamorous, but that is perceived by other people to be a deviance,
Hmm.
you're not going to really feel comfortable disclosing that to people. And you know you're there might be really unnecessary like shame around it and things like that. And so it really can create a sense of isolation and keep people from reaching out and having a community of support. That is one of the biggest, I think, detrimental consequences to it.
I 100% agree with you. You used a word that stood out to me. It was deviance. There was a time when homosexuality was considered a deviance. What do you know about the status of polyamory and non-monogamy as far as it being considered a deviance?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you bring up kind of like how with LGBTQ that's been considered a deviance. And there's actually really recent research that shows that non monogamy is considered by heterosexual kind of straight populations to be even more deviant
Hmm.
than than gay, queer, LGBTQ. And there's a lot of they actually did a study. They looked at like 455 straight individuals and kind of how they what terms they use to describe couples in non-monogamous relationships, and there was so much more dehumanizing language used to describe that than there was when they looked at like queer couples or straight couples or other couples. Um, so yeah, it's hard. There's a lot of negative messaging around it, unfortunately.
As far as what is it called? I think it's the DSM. Am I getting that right? The
Yeah,
um
diagnostic and statistical manual. Yes, you're right.
right. So that's what that's the psychology Bible, right? More or less. Is non-monogamy listed in there, and how?
That's a good question. Not that I know of, but don't quote me on that. There, like I actually looked back at my counseling textbooks because I wanted to see like how was non-monogamy treated in my multicultural class, for example.
Mhm.
There was a little blip on
Uh-oh.
LGBTQ,
Oh,
and there was nothing on non-monogamy. Oh no, did you lose me for a second?
for a second, you're back though.
Oh, okay. What I was saying is I looked at one of my old counseling textbooks for my multicultural class. I believe out of that whole entire book, there was a little blip, like a paragraph on LGBTQ working with queer communities, and there was nothing on non-monogamy. So it
Huh.
actually it hasn't been. There's not a lot of really education period about it, but that has been getting better in recent years. But yeah, it's more of like it's not really talked about, period, than talked about badly. But again, like I said, what we don't talk about often says a lot.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally agree with you on that. I kind of want to dig in on that and see if you know, I guess, of any changes that you're seeing, anything that you know of that like within okay. In on this podcast, I've been able to
Mm-hmm.
talk to something like 100 therapists and counselors and life coaches and a bunch of folks who are poly-friendly and affirming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's because I got all of these names from polyfriendly.org website. So,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have had the opportunity to bring these people to light and say, hey, here's a bunch of polyam friendly counselors and therapists and people that you can talk to as you're navigating your journey, depending on where you are.
Yeah.
But in even the people that I've talked to, it's a drop in the bucket compared to how many therapists there are and the education that's going out in the therapist, psychology, etc. world. So I kind of want to
Yeah.
get your insight on that if you can share. Like you said that it's changing. Like, do you how is it changing? What are you
Yeah.
seeing?
Well, when I say it's changing, I guess I'm speaking from my personal experience. When, like I mentioned, I started out in 2016, and at the time, there was really there were a few resources for therapists if you looked for them
Hmm.
on like really how to how to support your clients who are polyamorous or in non-monogamous relationship structures. But you had to like really search them out. And now like I am seeing more kind of more educational support coming out, and there's a lot more. What I go to a lot is just looking at what is the research that's coming out that people are doing around this. So yeah, over the years there has been more and more coming out, but you still kind of have to search for it and be on, it kind of have it on your radar.
I have a good one. I have a good one. Okay, so we've got, ethical non-monogamy is what we keep talking about, right? Polyamory, swinging, whatever, anything that that is out there in the open, where we're not hiding things from our partners.
Yeah.
What is the teaching around, like, if somebody is cheating, right? Around infidelity, is it always like, hey, let's kind of get back and like just be a couple? Is there any talk about, exploring non-monogamy in like conventional mainstream psychology education? Or is it always like, let's just bring things back to the couple and, curb the cheating? Is there any like, hey, maybe we should explore non-monogamy as an option? Not that that's a good place to be coming from,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah. I'm not sure how to answer that question as far as the education around it, because like I said, when I was getting my education, nothing was said about it. So
not even infidelity? I know I'm picking your brain right now.
No, like I'm going into the way back machine here. Oh yeah, I mean, like there is a lot more research on infidelity and working with partners to recover from that, and a lot more education around that. With polyamory, honestly, a lot of kind of the education that I have gotten around it has been through self-education and seeking it out, and from the polyamorous community itself. So I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but
I'm going to let it sit and let the audience decide. We'll figure that out a little bit later, but maybe I sidetracked a little bit. Let's get back to what the mononormative messaging does to our community. There was another word that you used as you were describing some of the effects that you've seen, and it was dehumanizing. So when we have, I think it was you were talking about how people describe folks in non-monogamous relationships. You were saying that the heteromononormative community at large sees non-monogamy as more of a deviance than even LGBTQ, and the comments were even more dehumanizing. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what is it that yeah, I guess I'll just leave it kind of broad, and just kind of give me your insight on what you think on the dehumanizing part, and I guess how the mononormative messaging can continue to exacerbate that and make it even more dehumanizing for us.
yeah, I think as a society at large, in American culture, we are very, very tied to like our Puritan roots. And it's really interesting when you kind of like go back and even just looking at to a lot that is kind of on my mind for kind of where we started from is James, did you in high school read The Scarlet Letter? Did they have you read that?
I'm sure that I was supposed to. I probably skimmed, pages here and there and knew enough to get my book report done.
That's actually and it maybe now that you're older, that would be something interesting to kind of come back around to with fresh eyes, especially in the context of like non-monogamy and prejudice and how things are kind of how they show up, because the book really it it talks about, so the main character, her name is Hester Prynne, and her husband kind of abandons her, and so she takes up with like the minister and all this. And the book is about just how vilified she
Right.
is for that, and
Uh-huh.
how mistreated she is. And by the way, the guys kind of get away, like,
Yes.
you
Totally.
know, but she is like so punished for um, the relationship that she had, outside of her marital relationship. And it's just really interesting kind of look into Puritan culture and where we've come from. And it's interesting to think about how pervasive it is, as far as like how judgmental we as a society can be towards people
Mhm.
who pursue structures outside of the monogamy norm.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, so speaking of that book, I mean, that book was based Puritan, so I'm thinking like 17, 1600s. Hey, Robbie, thanks for joining us again. And Mandy, looks like. Uh, so I mean, we're basing that on, something maybe 400 years ago, right? That's how people were. And obviously a lot has changed.
mhm,
And here we are, in this explosion of technology and this explosion of information, where people are able to access so much more. And while there's still not a lot of mainstream polyamory or non-monogamous representation, you were talking about it yourself. You can still get on Google, type in a little search, and find a lot of what you're looking for. That
yeah.
stuff is definitely out there
Mhm.
more. And how do you think that is affecting your clientele? Like, now that I mean, all of this mononormative messaging, everything that we've grown up with over the past 30 years, whatever,
Mhm.
however old we are. And now in the last like 5 to 10 years, it's like, hey, here's this possibility. How has that been, reflected in your clients?
Yeah, I think, well, so there, with like being able to connect and things online, I think that has really helped to propel the polyamorous movement, because all of a sudden you can kind of like connect to other voices
Hmm.
and, realize, oh, like maybe this makes sense. Maybe like I am not weird for having thought about these things and have been wanting to explore other relationship structures and have more people in my life and kind of like a more abundant type of love. And so, having the supportive community, I think it can really help normalize various relationship structures for people. And it can really help people with feeling more confident with kind of coming out of their shell and
Hmm.
exploring different things. And so, yeah, I think that the internet has been great for polyamory as a whole.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of part of the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing here. A bunch of all of the polyam content creators that I see out there, like, I feel like our unified mission is to just normalize monogamy,
Yeah.
normalize non-monogamy, I should say, and make it so that it's not some weird thing, I guess. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know. Maybe it'll always be quote unquote weird. Maybe it'll always be on the periphery. Like, I was having this conversation with my brother the other day. When you look at stuff like just basic numbers, statistics, whatever, the majority of the population is heteronormal or heteronormative, right? Like, the majority of the
Mhm.
population is just heterosexual and monogamous. Um, so if we are not hetero and monogamous, like, we're automatically outside of the norm, right?
It's when you actually look at the stats, it gets really interesting, because I've seen different numbers, but it can kind of vary based on the based on the literature, based on the research, but 1 in 5, that's the number I go to.
Mm-hmm.
1 in 5 people, are in a non-monogamous relationship structure at some point in their lives. Like that's the lifetime prevalence of people who engage in non-monogamy. And that's the same amount of people who exercise as much as we're supposed to be exercising. So, that's a lot. It's actually not as out of the mainstream as people might think, but it's because people have to be so careful. Like, I mean, a lot of my clients are just that you just have to be so careful who you tell and who you come out to. So people probably know more people who are engaging in non-monogamy than they realize, but because you do have to be careful, like people don't know. So yeah.
Let's finish it off by touching on that fear, that fear of coming out, that fear of being found out. I mean, obviously that's based in this mono-normative programming that we've received, generations on generations. But what would you say to the community who is struggling with that today?
Yeah, it's scary. And I think there does need to be care taken in coming out. And, it's really important that people come out in spaces where they feel safe to do so, because that's going to continue to help build confidence with coming out. And there really is, coming out is kind of it's a social advocacy in a way, because the more people who do, are open about their relationship structures, the more it will help embolden other people to be open. And that helps, kind of like with the community connecting and sharing and things like that, which helps combat that isolation that we were talking about in the beginning. Can be so pervasive, but with coming out, that can help to combat that. So it can be hard, and I think you need to be careful and have a supportive community around that. But there's also so much potential for it being a very rewarding thing. So, and like you mentioned with your podcast, that's something I was thinking about, just thinking about this topic. Like, that's kind of what you're doing, is combating that mononormativity. And so, yeah, I think that's awesome.
Well, thank you. And I feel like as you're talking there, I'm thinking that all a rising tide lifts all ships. And so more and more of us coming out and being, when it's safe to, and when we feel safe to, more of us coming out and creating that representation, be the representation that you want to see in the world, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Try to make the world a better place.
Yes, always try to make the world a better place. And the other thing that they're great, right? Good job, producer at Business Bros Pod. Go check that out. The other thing that I was thinking as you were talking there was when it comes to normalization, it doesn't mean that it's the majority thing that like everybody does. It just stops being seen as something that's so out of left field. You said 1 in 5, like that's how many people exercise regularly as much as we're supposed to. That's a pretty significant number of people. And we don't think of people who, exercise and whatever 3 to 5 times a week as freaks or weirdos. So that's what we're trying to stop, stop being seen as freaks or weirdos. Yeah, I mean, we're a little bit freaky and a little bit weird sometimes, but
What is normal?
What is normal?
Fine by me.
Oh, Ross.
I love it. All right, Alonna, before we get out of here, I do have one final question for you, which is, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, if they want to chat with you, tell especially our listening audience how they can get a hold of you, and if there's any regional restrictions on where you can help them.
Yes, so I am licensed in Ohio, Virginia, and Kentucky. So to work with me, you would need to be in one of those states. But, I still welcome, people just reaching out if, you have any questions or want to connect or whatnot. My email address is Alonna, and that is spelled, well, it's on the screen, but Alonna And then my email is Alonna at life-tree-counseling.com. And my website is www.life-tree-counseling.com. So yeah, looking forward to connecting with folks.
Perfect. What will they find at your website?
So I have my bio, services I provide, all that good fun stuff. It's the website for my practice. So yeah.
Perfect. All righty. Well, thank you again so much, Alonna. I really appreciate your time and just for hanging out with me and chit-chatting for a bit today.
Thank you for having me, and thanks so much for doing this podcast and combating the mononormative messaging that we're bombarded with. So
you are too sweet. Thank you so much. And thank you, as always, to our live audience for tuning in today. As a reminder, when we're live, you get no commercial interruptions, but the same can't be said for the podcast download. So if you want to avoid the commercial interruptions, be sure to catch us live Monday through Wednesday, 2:30 Pacific time, or sign up for our Patreon where you'll get access to our commercial-free RSS feed and support the show. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, wherever it is that you downloaded podcasts if you haven't already, and please leave us a review. We'll really appreciate it. That is all we've got for you all today. Thank you, as always, and thank you, Alonna, for hanging out. Until tomorrow, as always.
Have a nice day.
Thank you for tuning in to the Practicing Polyamory podcast. Would you or someone in your polycule like to be a guest? Sign up at practicingpolyamory.com and join the conversation. Please support us by subscribing, liking, and following us on social media at Practicing Polya by clicking any of the affiliate links on our website or by subscribing at patreon.com/practicingpolya.